Welcome to part 2 of the Introduction to Compassion and Self-Care workshop. In this section, we'll look in more depth into how our brains have evolved and look more closely at the definition of compassion. Evolution has shaped us, and our brain has been designed to function in certain ways. The oldest part of our brain, which you can see at the centre of this diagram, is our reptilian brain. This is approximately 500 million years old and is responsible for our fight and flight instinct, as well as our need to find food, shelter, and a mate, for example. The next part of our brain is the paleomammalian part, or our limbic system. This is approximately 120 million years old and is responsible for things such as kin caring and affection, alliances, play, and social communications. For example, you won't see a crocodile or other reptiles playing with their young or cuddling, but you are likely to see lions doing this, for example. For the purpose of this workshop, these two parts of our brain will be referred to as our old brain. Our new brain is only approximately 2 million years old, and this is our neo-mammalian part of our brain. This is responsible for things like symbolic thought, self-awareness. It's also responsible for metacognition, which is our ability to think about thinking, and mentalizing, where we can understand and be aware of our own and others' mental state or emotions behind their behavior. And this is the human part of the brain, or for the purposes of this workshop, the new brain. Although our new brain is a great problem solver, it can also cause some problems for us, as this slide will demonstrate. So why don't zebras get ulcers? Well, if you've ever watched a nature documentary and seen a zebra being chased by a lion, but the zebra is lucky enough to get away, you'll see that that zebra quite quickly calms back down and will continue grazing on the grass and forget about the lion chasing him so he can just get on with the rest of his day. As you can see on the graph here, the yellow line is the zebra. While he's being chased, his emotion level or stress level shoots up high, but once he realizes that he's safe, the zebra's stress level goes back down and he gets on with the rest of his day as if nothing had happened. However, if you stepped outside your door today and a lion chased you and you were lucky enough to get away, would you spend the rest of the day as if nothing had happened and not think about it? This is very unlikely. This is because our new brain can sometimes be very unhelpful. We have to cope with things that zebras just don't need, such as self-criticism, imagining a worse future, emotional avoidance, and shame, for example. The red line on this diagram is a human. When a human experiences stress, that stress level shoots up high, but instead of going down like the zebras did, it continues to remain high as our new brain is ruminating and worrying about the past and having fear of feelings and emotional avoidance. However, our new brain also has the capacity to manage these difficulties, including empathy, perspective taking, and mentalizing. This slide shows what can happen when we perceive a threat. Notice how I use the word perceive here. Not all of us will face physical threats such as a lion in our everyday lives. However, there may be other things that we perceive as a threat, such as exams or deadlines, or changes in your work or personal life that cause you stress. So when our threat system is activated and we've perceived a threat, We can often act in a way that's mindless, so there is no intelligent purpose, meaning, or direction behind our thought. We'll be self-critical or impulsive and judgmental, and this can result in us being angry or blaming ourselves or other people. We may come across as uncompassionate, uncaring, or unsupportive. And this all happens in a split second. So when our threat system is activated and we perceive a threat, it can make it very difficult to approach a situation with rational thought. We tend to react to a situation in that split second instead of responding to it in a calm and rational way. It's important to remember that this can happen to anyone, and so does not make you a bad person if this has happened to you before. Later on in the workshop, we'll have a look at ways to counteract this threat brain. This slide shows the components of compassion from the caregiving mentality. When we have access to our soothing system and we're more able to show compassion, we care for the well-being of ourselves and others. We're more tolerant to the distress of others, and we're distress and needs sensitive. We'll be more non-judgmental and more able to show empathy for other people. However, when we have too much drive and/or are feeling under threat and we can't access our compassion, this is what happens. We're more likely to be distress insensitive and intolerant, and more vigilant to the error and failure of other people and ourselves. We're more likely to be more judgmental and show low sympathy, and are more likely to compare ourselves to other people. We feel that to get ahead, we need to exert control. Some people experience anxiety when they feel like they have to control the things around them to feel better. But there are some things in life that we simply can't control, for example, the future. And so we try to control other things or the other people around us to reduce this level of anxiety. The Good Samaritan experiment is a good example of what can happen when we have too much drive or are feeling under threat. There were two groups of people in this experiment who were both told they needed to give a speech in the building across the road. The first group were told they needed to give this speech immediately. They needed to run over to the other building straight away because the speech is in 5 minutes' time. The second group, however, were given the same speech but told that they had plenty of time to learn this speech and to walk over to the building across the road. They had hours before they had to give this speech and so had plenty of time to practice. While the two groups of people were walking over to the other building to give their speech, there was a person laying on the ground who appeared to be unconscious. From the first group, who were told that they needed to learn this speech immediately and go straight over to the other building because they might be late, only 1 out of 10 people stopped to see if the unconscious person was okay. However, in the second group, who were told they had plenty of time to learn this speech and to walk over to the other building, 2 out of 3 people stopped. At the end of the experiment, those who didn't stop were asked why. And it wasn't because they didn't care about the person on the ground or that they didn't want to help. It's because they were so focused on getting over to that building as soon as possible and giving this speech, which they didn't have much time to learn. So they had too much drive and they were feeling so under threat that it made them insensitive to stress around them, and they simply didn't notice that there was a person in distress. So this can show how this can happen to anyone and how too much drive or too much threat can be a bad thing. So what is compassion? What does compassion mean to you? Take a couple of minutes to write down what you think compassion means, or what actions a person may do show compassion. Paul Gilbert, the founder of compassion-focused therapy and the author of The Compassionate Mind, defines compassion as the ability to understand, approach, and engage with suffering and distress. The desire and motivation to alleviate suffering, uproot its causes, and seek to prevent suffering in the future. Otherwise known as moral courage and dedication and wisdom to learning and to understanding. Compassion is not a weakness, an indulgence, or a luxury. Lots of people who work in healthcare and for the NHS are happy to show compassion to others. But when it comes to self-care and self-compassion, will often think that this is an indulgence and makes them selfish. Compassion is the basis for the development of moral courage, to look into, move towards, and address the difficult and painful and its causes. This image is taken from Buddhism and explains the difference between mental pain and suffering. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of life. We will all experience stress, and loss, and bereavement in our lifetime. This is inevitable and unavoidable. However, most of us are then struck by a second arrow, which is often more painful than the first arrow because it lands in a part of the body that is tender and inflamed after having been wounded by the first arrow. This is the arrow of resistance and avoidance. This second arrow is our unwise efforts at avoiding the unavoidable pain of life. We may try to do this by running away into distraction, addiction, or spinning off into the past or future. We may try to fight the pain by becoming controlling, judgmental, and aggressive because things are not going our way. We may try to tune out the pain by becoming so busy that we don't need to feel what is happening. But then we're also hit by a third arrow, which is thinking that there is something wrong with us because we've been struck by the first two arrows. This third arrow is shame, and this is an intense source of suffering. We feel shame that we've experienced that unavoidable pain, but we also feel shame because we're not able to avoid or resist that pain. The important point here is that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And what we mean by this is that pain in life is unavoidable, but suffering is optional as there are things we can do to alleviate that suffering. Compassion involves recognizing this, being able to engage in this reality and develop the wisdom and skills to try and alleviate it. To do this, we have to spend time developing our minds to become more mindful and more compassionate. This brings us to the end of part 2. Next, please click on part 3, which introduces different skills and techniques to help you improve your compassion and self-care, and completes the workshop. Thank you.